Hi everyone, I'm Sweet Melba. Thanks for joining me for Sunday on the Porch. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. This is a weekly video that I do, looking back on aspects of our life and looking forward as well, all for a life well lived. So if you're new, again, welcome. If you've been watching, thanks for joining me again. So, one of the places that I always wanted to go was Paris, France. I had wanted to go since I was probably in high school. I took French in high school. I think I took 3 years of French, and I took 2 years in college. I think all in the hopes that one day I would go to Paris. And when I was 36, I had the opportunity to go, and I went. And I went with my boyfriend at the time. We had been dating for about 3 to 4 months, and it was kind of spur of the moment. And it was a great opportunity, and we decided to go. And when I came back, I was engaged. So here's the story. I hope you'll join me. So, as I said, I always wanted to go to Paris, France, but I wasn't going to go on my own. I had gone on a couple trips by myself on some cruises where, I was with somebody, but they were kind of doing their thing. I was doing my thing. So, but I had never really traveled alone for any length of time, and certainly not internationally. So, it was something I always wanted to do, but I didn't know when I'd get the chance to do it. And my boyfriend and I, as I said in the beginning, had been dating for about 3 to 4 months, and we had actually watched the movie Angels and Demons. And in that movie, if you've seen that, you may recall that there are portions at the Louvre and in Paris, as well as Rome and the Vatican. So it was just a great movie. And it was like, oh, wow, wouldn't it be great to get to go there? And we were kind of chatting about it after the movie and whatnot. And I said, I've got a bunch of air miles I haven't used. They're just piling up. Maybe we should go. And it was kind of like, well, should we? And next thing I knew, I was on the phone with Delta Airlines booking 2 tickets to Paris, France. I think it was going to be like 2 months later. And again, we'd only been dating 3 or 4 months. So this was kind of a big thing, right? But it just felt perfectly right. And it was an opportunity. And we were both excited. And, it was like, yeah, let's do it. So we were going to do it. So, I really had always been, and I kind of still am, I plan everything, and so this was really out of the ordinary for me in that I was going on an international trip. But there really wasn't a lot of planning. We just booked these tickets, and then, the planning was going to come later. But really, we really didn't do a lot of it. We bought a few tickets online, but everything else we were kind of just, figure it out as we went. And so, a lesson there, sometimes you just got to take the opportunity when you get it and go for it. And it just felt right. My intuition told me, all was good with our relationship. We really enjoyed spending time together. I was very comfortable with him. And it seemed like just a fantastic trip. And we were, again, super excited to go. And I had all these air miles. So if you've got air miles booked up, use them. Find some opportunities to use them because they're not good to anybody else. You might as well take the chance and plan a trip and go and do something. So, again, lesson learned there. We used up them points. So we leave for Paris and we left on Halloween. So it's kind of an anniversary. This is 19 years ago we left to go to Paris. And so off we went. And I was just super excited about the whole thing. So, unbeknownst to me, though, my husband was having a little bit more of a stressful time because he was planning to propose. I didn't know that, but as I shared in one of my other videos, the topic had come up before I left with my mom. I had said, "Hey, guess what? We're going to go to Paris." And she said, "He's going to ask you to marry him." And I was like, "What? I wasn't even thinking about that." And she said, yeah, he's not going to miss that opportunity. And as I said, sure enough, he did not. But I talked to my girlfriend, and so I was kind of prepared in case the subject or the proposal came up. Well, was I ready to do that? And it's kind of one of these lessons I'll share along in the video of that um, the experience of being in love and kind of what you learn from that experience. And again, this trip was just the excitement of our relationship, and here we were going to go on an international trip. I think as we get older we tend to lose that excitement for things. So just a reminder and a lesson I learned was, don't get so tied into the planning on trips and activities and stuff that you forget about the fun and the excitement of going to somewhere or going to do something that you've never done before, and how much fun that could be. So I definitely learned a lesson with that. And I have to remind myself of that frequently, because I always get into I don't get overwhelmed, but just the planning and everything that you do to go on trips and whatnot, and you forget about the fun part of it. So just remember that. But this was kind of a stressful thing for my husband. So again, this is all unknown to me, right? So one of the things we had been doing was we were practicing with French. So we'd gotten some cassette tapes and we would play them on the car radio and stuff. And my husband knew no French, right? So he had a kind of a bandwidth of about 5 or 6 words, he said. He would learn those and be good with that. He'd try to learn a sixth or a seventh, and he'd forget one of the other ones. So his was short, but I was looking forward to using the French that I had learned with all these classes I had in high school and college. So I was like, oh, this is great. But he was also planning to propose in French. So he apparently had written down on a white index card, will you marry me in French? And so he brought that along, and that was his plan. So he was a little concerned on how that was going to go. But he also told his mom that we were going to Paris. And I guess he told her that he was going to propose. And his mom was like, hmm, it's not been that long, right? It hasn't been, a few months. He's like, yeah, that's true, but I'm doing it anyway. So again, kind of one of those lessons. You listen to your gut and your intuition, and I guess for him, he knew that that's what he wanted to do, and he wanted to propose in Paris, and he was excited about it, but apparently nervous too. He was concerned that I might say no. I guess you always got to be worried about that, right? So he was concerned it would ruin the whole trip if I said no, and then it would be uncomfortable, and how would that all go and whatnot. So he was a little worried about that. So I guess he was thinking, do I propose when we first get there at the end so I don't ruin the trip? Or he proposed in the middle of the trip. So, and it worked out all fine. But he was worrying about stuff like that. I wasn't worrying about stuff like that before we left. That wasn't anything really on my mind, seriously, from that standpoint. So, yeah, so he was a little worried. But he was also worried about the ring. So he had the ring, I guess, but he was afraid that a few things. He was afraid that the security when we went through TSA when we were leaving was going to set off on one of the alarms or the scans, and he'd have to show it. So he didn't want me with him. So he made up some story about, I kind of have a checkered past and whatnot. And I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Again, I've only known him for 3 to 4 months, and I knew some good stories, but I was like, okay, all right, whatever. So that was all a ploy, of course. But so when we get to TSA, we actually ended up being pretty far apart, and not for that reason. I don't remember that actually. But anyway, I ended up like 4 rows, further along than him. But I guess he got through security with no problem. They didn't ask for the ring to go out, but that certainly would have blown the surprise if I was right there with him. So he was a little concerned about that. But I got stopped by TSA though, interestingly enough, and my husband loves this story, in that, I had brought my hairspray, which was a can of Aquanet. It's what I used back then. This is again 19 years ago. And there was just a little bit left in the can, and I thought, oh, I'll bring this and just use it up, while we're, freshening up in the flight and that kind of thing. Well, TSA is like, oh no, you can't take that on. It's too big. He calls it a 40 ouncer. It was not. But there was a tiny little bit left. And I said, well, I thought it would be okay. There's not that much, certainly less than 3 ounces. They're like, no, it's the container. You can't bring it on. So anyway, so he'd gotten through security and he looks back and here I am and he sees them confiscate my hairspray and he was like, oh no. But he gets a kick out of that even now telling that story. So anyways, but we made it through TSA. Off we go. Had to fly to Atlanta, and then from there we flew on Air France, which was a treat. Champagne when you get on the seat. And so, if you've been to Paris, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. But what an experience, And when we landed, we had warm towels to freshen up, and it was just a treat in and of itself. But super exciting to go on. But like I say, I was super excited about it and really had no worries on my end, but he was a little worried with everything. And I guess one of his other concerns with the ring was where was he going to propose? And he thought about doing it on the Pont Neuf, which is the Lovers Bridge, famous bridge in Paris. But he was concerned because he had heard about all these pickpockets and thieves and whatnot. So he was afraid, that he was going to get on his knees or whatever he was going to do, and somebody was going to come by and swipe the ring as he pulled it out. But so he didn't decided not to do that. So more to come on the actual proposal. But yeah, so it was just two different perspectives there. But I was very comfortable with the whole thing. Again, I think we were very comfortable with each other. I was very comfortable traveling. And really, in some respects, that's a great way to test a relationship and how things are going and how well you get along is to go traveling with each other for an extended period of time. So I think I kind of thought about, well, hopefully this goes well and we can do that. That'll give me a little insight into how this relationship is going to go. But anyways, we were super excited and we had a send off and whatnot. So lots of fun. And a lesson again on that, I'm always the planner and I got to think things through and whatnot. But that experience, we did not. We booked it off. We were planning. I was shopping. I certainly didn't have clothes to go to Paris in. So I got to go shopping and I had a couple fancy dresses and just some new outfits to, kind of blend in. I'm sure we did not, and American tourists, but it was fun, the prep and everything. But again, it was that gut feeling, trusting in just the relationship and the love that we had for each other at that time. Just great experience, and again, a lesson in embrace that excitement and enthusiasm for things and try and not forget that. And I'll share a little bit that a little bit later. But I think it's all good for us to remember those experiences and the excitement and fun that you had. And it may be a while, 19 years ago, but we still remember it and we have a lot of fun with it. And we went and saw all the sights that you would see in Paris. Of course, the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and Notre Dame. We did an evening on the Champs Elysees. We went to the Orsay Museum and a Picasso museum. We were in the Tuileries Gardens and we went to the Bastille. I mean, we did it all. We were there 9 days and we really got a lot in and saw a lot, and it was kind of really booked. But it was so much fun. We were having a great time. So one of the things I really wanted to do in Paris, of course, the food is just, outstanding. And it doesn't matter where you eat. We went to lots of cafes. We really enjoyed those experiences, and the food was just wonderful. Everything just tasted so fresh and whatnot. But I really wanted to go to a fancy restaurant for dinner. So when I was buying my clothes for this trip, I had to have a dress for at least one of these fancy dinners. So I think that was the other reservation that we made, was booking a dinner for the special occasion, not special occasion, but special night in terms of dining in France. So I had a nice dress on and we went and dined at Laurent. So if you've been to Laurent, I'd love to hear your experiences or a thumbs up on that. But I was dressed pretty fancy, and I remember a funny part of this story. Kind of things don't always go as you planned, right? But I had some new stockings on, and so we're in the cab and they would just not stay up. would not. And they were supposed to, but they would not. And so I remember being in the back of the cab in this fancy dress, trying to get the stockings off before we got to the restaurant, and that the cab driver didn't notice. So, wardrobe malfunction, right? So, anyways, I was able to get them off, and I stuffed them in my purse. But we get into Laurent, and the service there was amazing. I think we had attendants with us the whole entire time we were dining, but wonderful food, and we knew it was going to be expensive. Probably not as expensive as it turned out, but it was about a $400 US meal. But what an experience. We don't have any photos from that, though, surprisingly, I don't think. I need to go back and look through that, but I do not think there is one. But they had a wonderful cheese platter, and just the service was amazing, and it was just a wonderful opportunity. And I still have that dress. I don't think I can fit it in anymore, but it's one of those, ladies, you'll know this, one of those items in your wardrobe that you just hang on to just in case, right? So who knows, maybe one day. But it was a burgundy dress that I had, with like spaghetti straps. So, anyways, just a little fashion information, and shoes that matched, of course. Anyways, but just so many great things that you can experience in France. And so that was certainly one that I was looking forward to. So, as I said, in Paris, we did a lot of different things, and I'm not quite sure how he ended up deciding on when and where he was going to propose. But we had been to so many different places. The Louvre was wonderful. The different museums. Although by the time we got home, we were kind of museumed out, and but we love museums. But just being in Notre Dame, and certainly with the fire that happened a few years ago, once you've been to these places and you see them on the news and whatnot, they're great remembrances of a wonderful time. But you kind of come attached to some of these places, internationally, that you've traveled to, even here in the US. But you've been there, you've seen that, the experience of being there. Those are just great opportunities, and I hope everybody gets an opportunity to do things like that. It doesn't have to be Paris, of course. If you've been to Paris, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if it's still on your list. It was just wonderful. We had a great time. So be sure to go if you get an opportunity and really want to go. Make sure you have that happen. You get to have that done in your life. It was wonderful, and I'd love to go back one day. So again, how he decided where he was going to propose, but one of the things we did book tickets for before we left, I really wanted to do a boat cruise on the Seine, and we decided to do a dinner one. And so that's where he decided to propose. So we went. We took a cab to the Eiffel Tower, because where you get on these boats is just right next to the Eiffel Tower there. So it's in the evening, and the Eiffel Tower was going to be lit up, and the lights at night, wonderful. So if you get a chance to do that, I would certainly recommend that. But we set sail off on our dinner cruise on the Seine, and you're going by all these places, the Bastille, and you go by the Notre Dame, and that's kind of the turning point in the cruise, the halfway mark. You pass Notre Dame and you make a curve and you start going back down the opposite side of the river. And I guess this for him was kind of where he was thinking, I better get doing this. But we had already had our meal and whatnot. And I remember him grabbing for my hand, reaching my hand. He was sitting on this side of me, on the right side of me at the table. And there were other people at the table, and everybody was in having their own conversations or whatnot. But he grabbed my hand and he was holding my hand and everything. But just about this time, the cheese course comes, and I absolutely love cheese. So I was like, oh, this is great. And he really didn't like it, so he wasn't going to eat all his, so I was going to have more than enough cheese. So anyway, so I let go of his hand and I started to eat my cheese. So unbeknownst to me, he was getting ready to propose, but I had to have my cheese. So I'm eating the cheese and whatnot. But as we're coming on the back stretch, right, of this dinner cruise, he's getting a little worried. He's running out of time. He's going to need to do this before we get back. So he grabs my hand again, and I was kind of a little like, hey, I'm eating my cheese. But he grabbed my hand again, and he says, he starts talking to me about how wonderful our time together has been. And I'm like, ah, I see what's going on here. So I paid full attention. And, anyways, he proposed. And he did not do it in French. I guess he was really nervous about that. And his French speaking hadn't been going very well at home. So he decided to get rid of that idea. He still had the card in his pocket, though, and he did show it to me. And we actually still have it in our keepsake. But he proposed in English. So it was very exciting. And I very quickly said yes. But, the people at the table were excited, and they had photographers that were going around during the evening and doing, the couple shots and group shots and stuff. So it was perfect timing. The photographer comes by, and we were able to get a photograph of us just after he proposed, which we have, it's in our home and always has been. It's just a great memory and moment that we share, and we continue to see that every day we go into that room. So it was just a wonderful evening, and we were getting back to the end of the cruise, and it had kind of become foggy that night. And so the picture of the Eiffel Tower is a wonderful remembrance. It just has this foggy feel to it, very romantic. And we really do treasure that photograph and have used it in a variety of ways. So just a special memory for us on what it looked like on the night that we were engaged, which was on November 5th. So that's coming up. So I think we may need to do a little French dining on November 5th. So we try to do those remembrance type things. And November 5th is one we kind of sometimes forget about, but we're not going to forget it this year. So, a lesson learned too, or an opportunity really, that, I now had a partner that I was looking forward to traveling with. This is before the engagement, right? But we really enjoyed our time together, and we were getting to travel together, and I was really looking forward to that. So it was, for me, having a partner, and it doesn't have to be married, of course, but that's been an important part in our relationship and continues to be even today, that we can go and experience things together. I think one of those other life lessons, that love taught me, so to speak, right, is, really trusting in those feelings you have, and how that, the excitement of, you know, the relationship that you have, and that that you go with that. And I think, as we get older and you've been married for a while, you kind of lose some of that. And it's nice to look at some of those items around our house that remind us about the special trips, like our engagement in Paris, that bring back those memories and that excitement and enthusiasm for what it was like at that time when the relationship was new and you were excited about where things were going. And so I think that's a great lesson for all of us, to not forget those moments. And not that we live our lives like that every day, but it's nice to have those moments, to remember those and what the excitement felt like, and the planning and all of that. So I'm glad to share that today, and I hope it reminds you of some of those special experiences. And for those too, I would love to hear in the comments. Do you have some great engagement stories to share? Where did you get engaged, and what was unique or special about that? I'd love to hear other people's stories about their engagements and things that they still remember. I mentioned about having, we have items around the house that remind us of that. And some of those things, the photo of our engagement that night. We have a little address, ceramic address plate, number 11. Our previous home, we lived on, our house number was number 11. And so we got one of those from France, and we still have that here, even though we're in a different house. And it just reminds us of that time there. And one of the things we did at the Eiffel Tower, because we did go up to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and in the gift shop, we got a postcard of the Eiffel Tower and mailed it to ourselves. So when we got home, it was here, and we have that on our refrigerator. But yeah, so it's just different things like that that we have placed around the house that remind us of those those exciting times, newly in love and, newly engaged, that we remember even now, 19 years later. So special moments. So I think it's a great lesson for all of us to place reminders around that kind of bring back some of those thoughts and memories for you. And I'm excited to share this story with you today, and some of the lessons I learned, and how love really did make this all possible, and continues to be an important part, obviously, in our lives today. So, yeah, Paris, the city of love, was certainly that for us. And it was a wonderful experience. And I learned so much from that, being willing to step out and try a new experience, and traveling internationally with a boyfriend. So with the time that we went, by the time we left, we'd only been together for 6 months. So that was a pretty short period of time. But we both knew, listening to those gut reactions, sometimes you just got to do it, right? And that's what we did with this trip. I had the air miles. We're like, we're doing this. Sometimes you just got to step out there and do that. And you may not have all your ducks in the row, but it's an opportunity. And if you get those opportunities in your life, you should take them. And certainly for all of us that are getting older, we may not have a lot of those opportunities. So when you get them, I think we all take them. So it worked out wonderful for us, and a great experience. So, well, thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the story of our engagement and some of the lessons that love taught me through this experience. So thanks again for watching. I'm Sweet Melba. I'll see you next Sunday here on the porch, and I hope you have a good rest of the week. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.